If you like our content about training, then you'll love our programming too. Head to the notes below to grab a free week of general physical preparation. You get unlimited access to me and fresh programming every single week for less than $1 a day. All right, welcome to another episode of the Hyperformance podcast. I'm missing my loyal co-host today. He's off getting a haircut, but we'll check in with the results of that later. I am here today with natural bodybuilding legend. Actually, no, I think that's not doing you justice. Bodybuilding legend, Alberto Nunez from 3DMJ. Welcome to the show.
I appreciate you having me here, man. Like, a lot of people could be tripping when it comes to this collab, but you and I get it, and everyone will see why this makes sense, I think, in time.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the reason you're invited on the show is because I've sort of known you at being at the absolute pinnacle of natural bodybuilding. The whole time I've been in the fitness industry, 3DMJ has almost been this established benchmark as far as who you guys are as competitors, the academic side of the brand as well. But then also, I think the biggest contribution is just doing your best to make all of that information publicly accessible. As someone who is a content creator and identifies as an educator, 3DMJ has definitely been a brand that has heavily inspired what I do, even though I'm not so much into the bodybuilding space, just as far as just being the gold standard of putting out up-to-date evidence-based information, but making sure it's pragmatic, digestible, and applicable for the plebs as well. So I just wanted to say my appreciation for that bit.
But yeah, man, I've been watching you the way you do it, because like for me, like when I consume content now more than ever, like educators, it's almost like an art form, right? And everyone has their own way of doing it. So like, I don't know, like I think the first person that really drew me to observing people who are, masters in their own domain was probably Robert Sapolsky. Like he's got those free lectures on, like it's like 20 something lectures, right? It's like basically all his books, like right there. If you ever have 24 hours to spare, but seeing him like grab hold of these, they got to be freshmen, sophomores maybe, and really captivate his audience. And yeah, it's like, to me, it's like freaking like Lady Gaga doing their thing, right? So I take a lot from everyone, and one thing I admire about you is not just the information, but also the fact that it's like you wake up every day, dude, and like drink like a cup of islands, and like you're like, let's go.
I feel really seen. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's amazing. I'm sure you've had this experience as well, just based on your career in the fitness industry, where just at a certain point, so many of the people that you've put on a pedestal for so long sometimes say all these nice things about you, and it's such a surreal experience. So I really appreciate that. I look at you as an absolute legend of the bodybuilding space, but I never really thought as well, because that's something that I really enjoy, drawing on principles and systems that are sort of outside of the fitness industry, and then trying to sort of distill, like, how can I apply these principles to what I do? I'd like to sort of go back through your backstory, because again, where a lot of these characters sort of come from, where I've applied their thinking to fitness or different systems outside of fitness, it's just sort of been ideas that I've collected on my life's journey. So I'd like to hear a little bit about your backstory, obviously as it relates and the trajectory that led to you getting into bodybuilding, but also, I guess, if you could identify along the way anyone else alongside Robert Sapolsky who maybe could have been an influence on you that other people wouldn't sort of expect.
Yeah, man. So I guess before I was a bodybuilder, I was an athlete, and like a pretty decent athlete, to the point where, like, I think a lot of like decent athletes, like you can't get them into the weight room. So yeah. I had so many opportunities to start early, but I was like, no, I'm good. It's like I'm fast enough. I feel strong enough. Like that's for like bodybuilders. I don't want to be muscle bound.
Yeah, you weren't lacking in any way.
And then eventually, I looked athletic. I looked just fine. So, there wasn't, my friends like really gravitated towards like the macho man looking dudes. But like for me, it's like Jerry Rice was like my idol growing up, like,
okay.
Like work ethic, galore. So this is the last thing I expected myself to like ever be doing. But I think it was a really good move in that with other sports, if you're decently athletic and you're very competitive, all you really have to do, and you understand the game, is like kind of show up, and your competitive drive and your knack for it will take you there. So to a certain extent. But with bodybuilding, it was one of those things where it's like, okay, it's like, you're stacking your gains. It's like, okay, like for me to be like this strong, to be this muscular, I have to do all the prerequisite work. And that was the first time that I guess that concept like really ever made sense to me athletically. So once I got a taste of it, I was hooked. And it took a few incidents. Like, dude, I lived like in the hood. Like I lived in the like Bay Area hood.
Sorry, I want to get back to that, but sort of something you're saying is sort of already challenging a common belief, I think, because I feel like you're sort of inferring that genetics are the least important for something like bodybuilding relative to other sports. It is about just like showing up and having to pay your dues, because I would say like the way it's discussed is people like, no, like bodybuilding of all sports is a sport where genetics play the biggest role.
Yeah. Well, I think like all sports at the highest levels, yeah, but I guess I sucked at bodybuilding compared to other things.
Okay.
That Rubik's Cube like really captivated me. Like I didn't play basketball, but I could pretend that I was a hooper for like 2 hours. When I was younger anyways.
And
not
is it
these
the
days.
sport with the oldest world champs? Like who's the youngest like serious world champion? I don't follow the natural side competitively as closely. Obviously I know to win a Mr. O, it's like no one's doing that in their early 30s. Like even the absolute freak of freaks. Whereas every other sport's like you can get there by your early 20s.
No, absolutely. And they're capped because, you could only run gear at the levels you need to, no matter how talented you are for so long, right?
Yeah.
And in natural bodybuilding, like you really don't get into your peak until like late 30s, early 40s. And I think that's kind of like moving upwards, because when you think about it, I mean, it's not a power sport by any means. It's about just stacking your gains and keeping yourself healthy at an orthopedic level. And if you do that, like there's not really a whole lot of, bottlenecks that can get in the way. Not the ones that people assume, like hormones and that stuff. It's really simple. And then also, it also, there's an element to it that you're going to do better as you learn to have more control over yourself. Right. Like, so for me, it's like, managing Bert better over time. And that just comes with age, obviously. So, last sport I thought I'd be, I don't know. I think my cap, like if it were track or something, I was like, you know what? I can be like a shitty little kick returner in a D1 school somewhere, which, maybe would have paid for college, but
so I really wanted football. They were sort of like the main things that you were good at early on.
I tried football, and then I realized very quickly I didn't like to get hit. Like it's like right away. Like I'm like, there's something viscerally wrong about getting like hit up here. Like even the routine hits in football are pretty freaking gnarly. So I did a little track, but before I knew it, it was like kind of getting like my track was getting in the field of like in the way of my off-season gains. It's like I'd bulk up to like 160, and then track season would start. And obviously the methods were all backwards. I was very poor at endurance running, so they would have me running with the endurance runners, doing no sprint work. I did the 400, mind you. That was their solution to the problem. And yeah, like had a bad injury like right after high school, and to be honest, it was kind of like I probably could have worked through it, but it was my moment to like, hey, let me take this bodybuilding thing seriously, because I saw all the good things that it did to me personally, the things that as a young man.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. I just wanted to take a second to let you know that Angus has poured all of his knowledge on e-commerce and organic content into an ebook, which is now available. If you want to check it out, head to the show notes or the link in Angus's bio. Thanks.
I needed. And then a lot of that was just like the things that people find annoying, like the 24/7 like surveillance, like the going to bed on time, the eating, all that. Like I needed that at that point in my life. And that's kind of where I transitioned to yeah, like going down the bodybuilding rabbit hole, but still.
What age is this? Is this sort of college age, tail end of high school, starting to take physique development more seriously?
Yeah, this was probably like 18, 19. And I mean, yeah, I went down like that rabbit hole really hard, but at the same time, I couldn't help but, I mean, super training was probably, man, I read that book over and over, like trying to make sense of it because it's a hard read, man, especially when you're that age. Um, so I'd always look at the sports performance side of things because there really wasn't anything in bodybuilding. Like even if you weren't IFBB pro, like you decided to go down that route, like most of these guys that weren't like top 3, top 4, like this is one of the perks about social media. And one of the positives rather is the fact that most of them were doing gay for pay, like to pay their bills. Like that's just how bodybuilders live. Like your most, I'm not going to say names, but like just hardcore bodybuilders that like really inspired you. If you look a few pages into like Yahoo searches back then, all of a sudden there's a picture of them in a thong like pull side. And you're like, oh, well, that's weird.
Bro, there's a legacy of that runs through the top level of bodybuilding up until this current era. Without again, like no need to go into names again. Like I'm sure those people are keen for that stuff to sort of slowly fade away on the internet. But it's sort of one of those things that you always sort of hear sort of brought up. And then when you start Googling, you're like, oh, wow, it's all fully just there. Just like one layer on, page 2 of the Google. So not page 1, really.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing was like, I mean, I grew up in San Francisco, like my first 17 years. So,
yeah,
the whole gay thing. But I'm like, the idea of like, I remember asking Lane Norton this was a long time ago. I'm like, Lane, is it true? Because like the sports performance guys were telling me this. They were like, at your show, there's just going to be like gay dudes like in the back cheering for you. I'm like, no way. Like, hey, go to these shows just for that. I asked Lane. Lane was like, yeah, but never mind them. You just do your thing. So yeah, like bodybuilding back then, like best case was like you ran a like you're like very archaic version of like OnlyFans if you were doing pretty well. So it was kind of a volatile move for sure, but this is where my heart was, right?
Men are such pigs.
They truly are. They truly are. Like, that is the one thing I got from them. Like, I'm just here trying to show my heart, and you guys are here sexualizing me.
You would go the bear at the bodybuilding show.
So yeah, times have changed, man. But I've always kind of I've always like how it goes. Like we were discussing this off air. How you don't want athletes to specialize too early when it comes to sports. And I think when it comes to the iron game, it's kind of the same thing. Like to me, it sucks that a lot of my bodybuilder like brothers and sisters, like they see Amanda Lawrence with her knees caving in on a squat and they're like, ooh, or they think powerlifting is all ego. And it's like, bro, like, or the weightlifting, like I'll stay up to like weird hours, like sometimes to catch like some good weightlifting. It's just sad because I don't know, man. It's kind of, I feel like having this well-rounded, I wouldn't say education because like what I'm good at is like really one thing, but the appreciation for the art, the iron game as a whole, I think it makes me better at what I do.
There's so many potential rabbit holes we could explore off the back of that. I want you to respond to the statement then that is good bodybuilding training, just the training, not talking about the nutrition side of it, is it the same as strength training, just minus the extremes of the lower rep ranges and the skill of the competition lifts? Is that something that you wish a lot? Is that sort of what you're getting as, or like what a powerlifting background can contribute to then set up a bodybuilding career? Like I think that's something a lot of those top guys like just had this real performance oriented lens training early on that I think serves the bodybuilding approach as well. Or is it more than that?
Man, yeah, I think it could go both ways because, with like a lot of good power bodybuilders that turn power lifter, and within like a year or two, they're like, here in the U.S., like national level stuff.
True.
But I also seen it go the other way too. Like I remember people don't know about Jesse Norris. Jesse Norris, like just you just don't
Freak of
know.
freaks.
Like to this day, his numbers don't make sense. And he did a little bodybuilding at some point, and like you can see it there, right? So I almost don't think it matters. Like if you're doing it drug free, like the principles kind of play off each other, right? Like I mean, shoot, like you have powerlifters that I'm like, hey, your rabbit hole right now is those quads. Like that's the prime mover on your squat. Maybe you should do some hypertrophy work, make the engine size bigger, and then we can put it in the car frame that is your squat. But then I've also seen it the other way around too with bodybuilders. I'm like, hey, you know what? Maybe you should do some more neurological like type of work. Like if I bet you like I'm learning right now, if I drive up my 1RM on the close grip bench press, guess what? All my bodybuilding rep ranges are going to benefit from it highly. So again, like I said, it's one of those things where it's like I'm glad I have this like education where I can like pull from other worlds, right? Whatever it is that samurai guy said that. It's like, whatever it is that you've dedicated your life to, like you just see everything through that lens. So you're able to pull from other worlds and apply it to, your needs like within your world. But bodybuilding training, I think very simple. You just learn a little anatomy, like find like what joint action takes the origin and the insertion as far away from each other as possible. You load them and then you feed like accordingly, which I'd say depending on how well trained you are, you want to eat at least maintenance calories within the confines of what is considered a high protein diet. And then over time you will grow a lot of muscle tissue. Of course, then you get to the point that I'm at, and it's not a lot of muscle tissue anymore. You get to the point where, like if I'm lucky, if I'm putting on 300-400 grams of tissue on a yearly basis at this point. But I mean,
is muscle? Sorry to cut you off, but on this topic, is muscle maturity a thing, or is that just what they're describing? Just a couple extra 100 grams of muscle makes them look more mature.
I don't know. So I know one thing for sure is that it's just a lot of it, I think, is just like skin changing over time.
Old man
right?
skin.
So, the old man skin. So, it's not as hydrated, so it looks drier. Right. So it's less elastic, less bouncy, less baby looking.
Yeah.
So that is one component. But, at the same time, there's really only so much muscle that someone can carry, and you can kind of guesstimate this by looking at their skeletal structure. So for example, like we dig up Neanderthal bones, we see where muscles attach, and you can kind of give it a good estimate in regards to like what their shoulders look like, right? So same thing with humans. It's like what you have is what you have in terms of surface area almost. So the best way I can explain like high level muscle growth, it's have you ever seen like the Manhattan skyline? Like, and this is a picture of it like in the 1900s and in the 1930s. And so there's just more stuff going on within there, but the amount of space it takes up, it's about the same.
Yeah.
That's about the best way I can describe like what happens to muscle growth, like beyond a certain point. Once you're beyond, say, that advanced level, you don't really add pounds to the scale, but every square inch of it seems to just matter more.
Yeah. Yeah, it is funny now that I have been, because that's the thing. I didn't really get to keep up with your journey. Like as soon as I became aware of you, you were absolutely stacked. But I know you're quite familiar with, and you've been on Steve Hall's podcast, Revive Stronger, a lot. And I've been following him since he did his first show all the way until now. And I remember internally never judging him because I've always respected people who put themselves out there. But and this is like a topic I want to get into. Bodybuilding is one of those sports where it's just not accepted to be average at it. there's this perception that if you don't have an elite physique, it's like, what the fuck are you even doing out there? But we don't have this same attitude to like basketball and things like that. Anyway, that was my honest reaction when I saw Steve Hall do his first show. I'm like, I can't believe this guy, like, you know, he's got so much attention as an authority on natural bodybuilding, and he's getting up on stage looking like that. Now, when I look at photos of his arms, I'm like, oh, people won't believe that he's natty. And like, obviously we never, but like, again, I believe that the guy's completely natural. Again, I've just seen this slow and steady, but then it's weird because when I go back through all of his progress pics individually, I'm like, there's never been this arm explosion. You know, it's just been just couple of grams. And there's just this tipping point where it's like, no, he looks like a freak now. Like he's, just airing out my own judgmental ass.
No, but I mean, that's how we view content, you know, like that's just the honest truth. And I mean, spot on with that. Like, I think high school athletes, sometimes they get it more than adults. Like, they know that, okay, it's like, bro, you're 5'9" with cankles and you're like the small forward in your basketball team. You're probably not going to make it to the next level, but like, dude doesn't care. Like, he's there every day grinding for his team, like, falling on the floor for loose balls. Like, this is the season, right? And they get so lost in their world, and they pour themselves into their work. And with adults in like physique sports, like, as soon as they get to that point where they're like, oh, I just don't have what it takes to make it to the top levels, it's like all of a sudden it's like, well, for what? And it's like, no, you don't get it. Like, the thing about athletics is, like, the reason we put our kids in athletics is not because we want them to, you know, they're not going to be, most likely not going to become like these multi-millionaire, like high level professional athletes. It's more so because of the life lessons that come with that. Right. And you get to extend that experience. You get to have this athletic career that runs parallel to the stuff that really matters. And you can borrow and pull from what you're learning. And it's because it's just a game at the end. It's just bodybuilding, and apply it to the things that actually like matter. So yeah, I hate the fact that, people are discouraged if they don't look like, you know, Ronnie Coleman 3 years in. But then also people, they find ways to discourage themselves from continuing with this, and that's not really what it's about.
Yeah, it is crazy though, because even at the entry level, like I said, it's scary the level of dedication again that you have to bring to almost like earn the right to step on stage. Because as much as we can say that it's like, no, anyone who's trying their best has earned the right to compete, it's like, you're going to have a very strong sense of self if you're not absolutely fucking diced, because it's like, you're going to be up there against, like, you know what I mean? The culture hasn't changed yet. Just sort of thinking, because it's on my bucket list to do a show. But again, I'm just like, could be brutal.
Yeah, I saw that.
If society's attitudes don't change before I get up there, I could be cooked.
Yeah, it's so crazy. It's so crazy. Like I remember there's this author, Jean Kilbourne, and she talked about like how the media manipulates us, right? Like, especially primarily women, in the fashion industry, like, cosmetics, all that, beauty industry as a whole. And it's funny because now that we have like social media as human beings, it's like, that's what we do to each other all day. Like, literally, we will take 40 pictures, apply all sorts of filters, and like just mind fuck ourselves. Like, so it used to be just like these evil corporations, and it's like, nah, guess what, homie? Like, it's just part of the human condition. And
we keep saying that all these various entities in society are doing it to us, but you're right. And it is society to an extent, but it is also just us doing it to ourselves. Like, for example, like, again, I'm not the most muscular guy in the world, but I know I have more muscle than some people out there. And my last girlfriend, she was in the fashion industry. So to her, I was absolutely fucking stacked. Like, I was twice the size of her last boyfriend. And she would literally say things to me like, you're the biggest guy I've ever dated. Like, you know, your muscles are huge. Like, can you tense your biceps for me? But it was me. Like, I'm physically, like, how I look, my physique development is a joke to me. And like, I couldn't hear, it doesn't matter if like I said, the person I'm in love with at the time is like, no, you're the biggest man I've ever seen with his shirt off. And like, now I'm just like, yeah, but it's like, I'm not there yet. Like, It doesn't matter if she's calling you Big Papi if you don't identify as Big Papi deep down.
Dude, and it's funny, like, just what you expose yourself to really changes the way you look at yourself. I remember
I'm not even trying to be big.
You're not, but you hang around. It's in close enough proximity where it influences, man. Like there was a picture of David Boston he was working with Charles Polk when he was an NFL wide receiver. And I remember seeing this picture. I was like 17, so I hadn't made a whole lot of gains just yet. And he's like signing autographs. His arm just it was insane for a wide receiver at the time. And I remember thinking to just haterade. I'm like, oh, he is so juiced up. Like Paulkin's got him on the sauce. I know it. And then it's funny because like now if I were to take a similar picture, like I am so much more bulbous and round than him. But like, to me, I'm like, I look too much like an athlete, not enough like a bodybuilder, you know? So it's a small print to this, right? To the body art side of fitness is that if you're not careful, man, like you'll never give yourself the props you deserve.
And how do you sit with that? Like not moving the goalpost on yourself while respecting that is part of just the fundamental human condition once you get on that, I guess, like hedonic treadmill.
Well, you know, like bodybuilding at the highest level, I think it is a human dog show, you know, like at the end, it's like it's so genetic. It's crazy. Like, you know, your forearm can be just these ratios, just a few centimeters off when it comes to the perfect ratio compared to your humerus relative to your clavicle. Your symmetry sucks. So like for me, it's like I know, like just self-awareness, like I know what my limitations are. I know what is good for me. And a lot of people might see that as I guess pessimistic almost, like you gave up on
structurally. Can you share those with us? So what are your structural limitations that hold you back?
So my rib cage is definitely like too narrow.
Okay.
Which is funny because when I ran the 4, I'd see myself next to those guys. I'm like, why do I have such a huge rib cage? It looks weird, you know? So it's just different sport. But like in bodybuilding, it's too narrow.
Like
right?
Arnie has a massive rib cage. Like that's definitely something that stands out to me. Is there a better example?
Yeah, and I'd say even Franco, he was just smaller relative to him, had an even bigger rib cage.
Okay.
So my rib cage small. My joints are. It's funny. I'm a carbon copy of my father, but my father was so much more like just a bigger frame version of me and a little bit shorter. So I'm probably 2 inches too tall. If I had similar structure, like just in terms of the way everything sits, maybe my torso is a little too long. Nothing I can do about that. So rib cage too narrow, torso too long. My frame is just too small in general. And
Wait, what would that look like skeletally? Sorry, if your frame was the right size. Do you mean like a longer humerus and?
No, I think my arms are good length. Like not just good length, but like the humerus relative to the forearm. I think that they're pretty good. But my torso is too long, I think. And let's see, everything. And then my rib cage is too narrow. And then just like my overall muscle shape, like I have some muscle bellies that are kind of round, and they're relatively round for how slight of frame I am. An interesting thing is like most people's physiques kind of tend to look like their faces. So I have like this Pee Wee Herman face, like very ectomorphic in nature. But for some reason, you know, the muscle bellies are kind of bulbous, right?
So you think you could pick bodybuilding potential, just a lineup of heads, just from structurally the right shaped head, you could make like pretty good pick.
Yeah. I mean, heads will tell you a lot for sure. So yeah, it's weird because I have this like egghead, like nerd shape head, but the physique is kind of okay. So beats me, right? I mean, look at Mike Tyson's head, dude. It's like you don't have to see the rest of his physique. You just see his head, and you're like, oh, shoot, like this dude's, you know, mesomorphic by nature, right?
Yeah.
Right. Interesting, right?
Yeah, that's really cool. Sorry if this seems like a bit too much of a pivot, but there's just so many topics I want to make sure we cover in this hour.
I'm with it.
what is the role of periodization in bodybuilding, especially with like your perspective being that it does pay to be well-rounded? Do you do more of like have a thread of everything consistently, or do you like a much more phasic structure? And again, because I've seen just the role of periodization questioned overall in bodybuilding, but maybe that's coming from the perspective of people who sort of just see it as training one quality. Yeah.
I'd say it's a little bit. I'm not too well informed. I think even with powerlifting, like back in the day, like just 5 years ago, like people were just chanting like "trust the taper," which like in hindsight is kind of like trust the peak week. It's like people who rely on that peak week, it ain't gonna look right, bro. Like nothing's gonna fix whatever we were trying to do over the last few weeks, like in 1 week. Like no way. We just do peak week every day or every week. I'd say on the nutritional front, obviously you're going to have, it's very obvious. Sometimes you have fat loss phases. Sometimes you have like weight stable or weight gain phases. So I think there's no, you can't even debate that, right? Like if you're going to do a bodybuilding show, you're going to have to enter.
If you want access to a community of like-minded coaches, head to the notes below and join our free school community. I'm in there every week doing Q&As, and there's plenty of educational content on the way as well.
Okay. So yeah, nutrition, absolutely. There's no debate in that. You're going to have to go through a, section in time that's a caloric deficit to be lean enough for your show. On the training side, you're going to spend most of your time in what is the most pragmatic rep range for hypertrophy. So somewhere around like 5 to 12 reps, plus or minus a rep, depending on the person, right? But then I'd say after that, there's probably 2 reasons to kind of shift the focus, like whether it's like pumpy or maybe heavier, more like strength-based work. It just depends on the athlete's needs. Like you might have someone that, hey, this dude's like 5'7", 210, big for a natural bodybuilder. It's like, bro, we need that work capacity up, or I think you can be in better bodybuilding shape. Let's, throw in some high rep work. Also, it takes some of the stress off the joints for a few weeks. It's something fun. It adds some texture to the timeline. This is great for many reasons. But then also the heavy work. Like you will have people that you're like, I know you can be stronger than this. You need to like find that like inner like grr. Let's throw in some strength blocks to drive up the strength, because that's going to help all other rep ranges. But I think the biggest thing there, and I think outside of this is more so bottom line. People just they do better when there's an element of play in their training, right? Or learning or what have you. And like I said, like if you're an adult and you're doing this, this is like your side mission in life, along with all the really important things. Remember, this is just a game. So like, let's have some fun. Let's play. Let's add some texture. So I think that's a big part that people appreciate is they're like, hey, is your athlete having fun with the training? And that can look very different from like one person to the next. You might have someone who's very analytical, like nerd at heart. Okay, they want to try something that, Milo Wolf has been talking about. Or, you might have someone who really loves their intensive work. They love going to Puke City and they buy programs and leg presses like in the 20, 30 rep range every other week. They're loving life. But yeah, that fun component. So, and just adding texture to the training, so underappreciated.
Yeah. So purely scientifically, like not essential, but then pragmatically and realistically, it's definitely going to make the process a lot smoother and almost like this like macro load management and just sharing the stress around maybe the different structures in a different way, sort of assisting with that process. Yeah, I absolutely love that response. I would like to talk about emerging thoughts about the application of volume for hypertrophy, because where I'm currently at with it, these 52 set studies or whatever have been quite controversial. And I think where it's left me, from the information that I've digested about it, is that for bodybuilders who have a lot of time in the gym and they're willing to dedicate as much time as is going to be productive, essentially we haven't found a hard cap on the amount of productive volume, assuming that you're recovering from it, whatever the fuck that means, and however you measure that. But then obviously that's not pragmatic. So, and so I think scientifically it's really, really useful to chase down these minimum effective dose heuristics for most people's needs. But then do you agree that if it is your sole pursuit, you essentially can just keep trying to add in more and more and more volume, and provided it's at the right intensity and quality, it will be productive?
Well, before I go down that rabbit hole, I think, yes, it's very clear. There's a pretty, I can confidently say here in 2024 as of today that as you add volume, you're going to grow more, 100%, right? But you can also get, and this goes back to the last thing, like so caught up in that bottom line that maybe someone can fit a lot of that into their training, but they're absolutely hating training, right? So something to keep in mind for those folks who, can't afford this, but it's like, man, I am like living in my own little prison I made for myself, right? The way I like to look at it is, because I'm not too interested in what I can, like, what can I get in a year, 2 years, 3 years, but more so like 5, 10, 15 years. And I'd say when I look at, so it's almost the inverse with enhanced athletes. With enhanced athletes, it seems that the high intensity will break them down more than like the high volume. And I think because like, dude, if you're, you just hopped on like this mega like steroid cycle for the next 3 months, it's like, you need to be careful. You shouldn't be redlining it every time.
Tendons take way too long to remodel. Yeah. So for them, maybe the pumpy high rep work like makes a lot of sense. But with natural bodybuilders, what I've noticed is the people who have been able to keep volume somewhere in that like middle class level, they tend to have longer careers. They tend to be orthopedically in a better place. So to me, it's like, okay, so who cares? Like if we can make you peak out in your early 30s, but like, wouldn't it just be safer to invest in, I don't know, this like stock portfolio that, isn't super risque, doesn't have a whole lot of crypto, whatever, but we're guaranteed to have these really nice payouts like over the long term and sustain that. So I see it very similar with the high volume as like speeding on the freeway, right? It's like pick your spots with it, That is sort of liberating, I guess, also to then know that it's like when you are having a focused physique development run, it's like, oh no, it's like as hard as you want to squeeze and as hard as you think you can right now, you can feel empowered that that's very productive as well.
Yeah. There's no cops in this stretch, like, let me like really get on it. But don't get to the point where you feel invincible, because eventually you will get pulled over, and being pulled over in our sport is an injury. Like something's going to happen. So yeah, it's a nice tool to play with, but life has to be right. I'd say like if you want to explore these higher volumes, it probably makes sense to bring other body parts down to like maintenance or maybe even risque maintenance levels and play with that. And I think you'll see some good changes, but trying to do 30, 40, 50 sets per body part on everything just because the research tells you that, like what I'm afraid of is people trying to do that overnight. That's like just changing their split from 1 week to the next. That can lead to some
Dude, I just want to see a study though on high school kids living at home with mum and dad, no financial worries or anything like that. Make sure they're not in a toxic relationship, and just be like, all right, like let's put this volume study to the fucking test.
Oh my God. Like, yeah, the people in their late teens, early 20s have no idea how unbreakable they are. Like,
yeah, like getting your washing done for you. And I'm talking like everything, like macro counted meals on the table, like mum's on it. She's reading 3DMJ muscle building pyramids. And
I will say this, I do think like when it comes to muscle, I think with all sports, it's like the earlier you start, like you just see a noticeable difference. Like you can tell with people that they took this up like when they were 12, 13. One of the freakiest athlete applications I ever received was from a 14-year-old girl. I thought she was trolling me, but she started training when she was like 9 or 10 or something like that. And to this day, out of all the things I've seen, one of the freakiest. And I just, I have been doing this long enough where I'm like, I've seen it all. But that was a great reminder of like, whoa, you take some good
14-year-old
genetics.
with a 5-year training age and decent genetics. Yeah, insane.
And more muscle than a lot of like female bodybuilders, like natural pro female bodybuilders. Insane. Blew my mind.
So I can do an arm specialization phase.
That'd be a good place to play with, I think, if you're going to do that. That's probably that or calves, have at it.
No, I can't wear knee sleeves because my calves are already too big. Like I got fucking... I think I had like a bit of a neurological disorder growing up. I walked around on my tippy toes till I was like 8 years old. So I've just got fucking... I also think that this is why I get a lot of hate from people with developed physiques, because I think they just see my calves and they know it's like they could do all the steroids they want and they will just never be able to hang with me from the knee down. It's like, it's my little bodybuilding trump card.
About calves, yeah.
But no, I'm going to measure my arms and I'm going to throw arm specialization in. Can you give us some recommendations for minimum effective dose bodybuilding? What does that look like for someone who either has the minimum, they're struggling to get into the gym, or for someone such as myself where I'm trying to get faster, trying to get stronger, trying to get more mobile, trying to bring up my conditioning, but I am trying to maintain a productive thread of hypertrophy year round?
Yeah. It's crazy because it's always so enlightening when you try to, for the first time ever, like, I'm going to bite the bullet. I'm going to figure out what my maintenance dosage is, because people are afraid to go there. They swear it's like right next door to like whatever was making them progress. And quite often what ends up happening is they're still making substantial progress with whatever that budget cut was, right? Maybe they were doing 12 sets for chest and they're like, you know what, I'm gonna do 8. I'm gonna do 8. This is kind of crazy, but I'm gonna do 8. And then they find out they're progressing quite well with 8. So you can figure out that, hey, maybe what you were doing anyways wasn't just enough. It was more than enough. You're going to find all these body parts that are much higher responding that you didn't know of, right? Like you might figure out that like, oh shoot, I toned down the volume and my quads just started to like blow up better than when I had it up here. That happens as well.
Is that really, so it really is a thing. You have to find it for each body part. You're a big believer in that.
Yeah, for sure.
Makes sense. But do you think it's like, because obviously there's stereotypes about certain muscles at a population level. Are you much into that? It's like, okay, so for example, quadriceps are a high volume muscle group, biceps maybe are a low volume muscle group, or is it on an individual level completely random in your experience?
I think there's just some muscle groups that are more predisposed to muscle damage, right? Hamstrings, right? Like a good hamstring session will really like set you back. Like most people could agree on that. Whereas
mine's sometimes longer than a microcycle, hamstrings.
It's insane, right? It's insane. So yeah. Like each body part's kind of like their own individual. And like you see this with people, right? It's like, hey, someone might have these like great shoulders, but like, man, like them calves, right? You know, that sort of deal.
In my program, to add some context to that, I really struggle to add in a lot of like hip stuff because in everything I do, like I'm doing Olympic weightlifting, I love to squat, but then finding space for consistent hinge work in there because a lot of my locomotive plyos are thrashing my hips as well. The sprinting taxes my hips a fair bit, but then like I also want to do like hip flexor hypertrophy work, but yeah, like that's a specific body part in a sort of concurrent training context that I find is very volume limited.
It gets so tricky with people who have performance goals, right? Like obviously this is where, you know, there has to be macro cycle planning, right? This is where I think you guys get to be extra picky about the tools you use. For example, like you have to look at what is literally the best quad builder I have access to because there's other things I have to do. So I like it because potentially for a lot of, I guess, hybrid athletes, you guys don't have time to waste. You guys don't have
Damn, I've
units
been
of
so
recovery to waste.
staunchly anti-optimal. All the listeners would be going wild right now. That makes sense. No, I'm hearing it. Like,
yeah. Like, but you guys get to where it's like bodybuilders, like take a 21-year-old, like, you know, you mentioned yesterday, 21-year-old that has all the time in the world. He's like, I'm just going to blast everything with like 40, 50 sets a week.
Yeah, you should be hitting it from every angle. Why not?
Yeah, like that's where we kind of lose out on the qualitative aspect of things, right? So, yeah, I think when it comes to hypertrophy, works for sure bodybuilders and for sure for performance athletes. Like, I think it's worth figuring out like what you can get away with. Actually, there's a good parallel here when it comes to calories. Like everyone knows it. Like when it comes to a caloric deficit, there is really like you go 400, you go 800, you can go 1200, you can go 2000 if you're a big enough mammal, right? Not eat for a day, basically. But there's small print associated with that, and that's the thing that like these bodybuilders don't get when they see that like, oh, I can do 40, 50, and I'm still part of like team like science. It's like there's always going to be small print like connected to that, and it's funny because when it comes to calories, people are quick to try to figure out, so what's the most amount of calories, aka the least amount of work I can get away with while still losing fat. But when it comes to like training volume, especially hypertrophy, like it's hard to get people to think the same way.
Yeah. Do you put that? I put it down to people's limited attention spans and just ability to put in that focus. I think it is so much easier said than done to crush 4x10 with fucking intent. Like 2x10, I can do it even after a hard session. Like 2x10, I can show up for 2 sets. But it's so weird how coaches will sort of through content creation acknowledge how frustrating it is to gain or maintain anyone's attention due to the attention economy and so many things in our life always trying to distract us. Yet then when they're writing their programming, this truth that they've sort of acknowledged is universally affecting people, it hasn't trickled down into the way that they program. And it is sort of interesting. It's like science is sort of telling us that we can get away with low volume. And then just also the world around us, it just makes so much sense to be. I can see why there's this sort of resurgence in fetishization of Mike Metzer style protocols and things like that. Again, it's not really what I do, but it is sort of what I'm trying to bring to my accessories. This feels like a good time to segue into, I think we've made it 60 minutes into a bodybuilding podcast in 2024 without bringing up length and partials, but I can't go a second longer. Is this something that I should be leaning into potentially to optimize the small space that I do have for my hypertrophy focused training? Or is it overhyped? Where are you at with it?
I think so, because a lot of athletic movements, they almost how do you say it? Like it's and this isn't my concept.
Not so much deeper ranges you're talking about, like, you know, in sprinting. Obviously,
it's like staying short is a good thing. You know, like you know, if you're a rugby player, it's like, hey, you want to be in position, right? So yeah, like conventionally, like you're going to get a little jacked from like just going from like I never played a sport to playing a sport, but at a certain point you're going to want to supplement that. And here's the deal: it's like this is again, I'm looking at this from like a bodybuilder lens, so I try to fix everything from like that perspective. But for a lot of athletes, like you look at them, especially I'm thinking of high school athletes. I'm like, man, you'd be such a better athlete if you just had more muscle and less fat.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously, it's dangerous to tell that to a high school athlete, especially like a high school girl, you know, but that's the truth, right? There's a sophisticated way of getting there. So
that's very huge in the dunking world. People doing all these crazy things with their training. It's just like, you've got a bit of a spare tire. Like, you know, fat doesn't fly.
Yep. Exactly.
And running speed, right? Like,
yeah. So you only have so much time to like dedicate to hypertrophy. So I might as well go for the thing that is like the most hypertrophic. So I probably would be using, if I were an athlete, to, you know, not get super jacked, but just as muscular as I need to be for my sport, I would probably favor things with constraints, like things like leg press, like things that, you know, I don't have to worry too much about coordination or learning the movement, and just get to work and jumping on those. Yeah. So absolutely. I will say it's gotten a little carried away, like the whole length and partials thing, to the point where, I mean, just from an orthopedic standpoint, like we all kind of knew this when people were intuitively, like if you see someone quarter squatting, it's like, oh, like that's going to suck for you when you're old, right? Because when you get into those planes of motion, right, at some point in life, like who knows what might happen. But it works the other way around too, right? It's like you can't like ignore like these like shortened positions either, especially if you're purely a bodybuilder and, you know, an athlete that's moving in all sorts of like, you know, I guess clever ways relative to us.
Yeah. Shout out to Milo Wolf, because I think a lot of people are shitting on him for being overhyped on the length and partials. Like, of course he's fucking excited. He's the one doing a lot of this groundbreaking research. I think why everyone's pissed off about it is because there's more than 1,000 other content creators like mimicking his content. So every time he says something about it, you're hearing it then another 1,000 times. So like, I know I've been critical of people like Ben Patrick for starting little content creation armies, but one, Milo's is not nearly that size, and at least it's a little bit more in line with the evidence. If maybe like, again, just fixating on an emerging idea but I mean, it's pretty fucking exciting. I mean, the idea, I really never thought it would be evidence-based to really challenge the full ROM concept. That just seems like I had a lot of confidence in that. I mean, and we had a lot of information that was supportive of it. And the full ROM thing isn't over, because again, you go back to like pragmatically, it's like, are those ranges as hypertrophic? But it's like, maybe not, but it's like maybe just from a health-seeking behavior perspective. And then I think, what are your thoughts on abandoning shortened positions and concentric, ignoring sort of pragmatism, but like, I mean, how much do we really fucking understand about actually, sorry, there's another question. I'm sort of just going wild with this. One thing that I can't wrap my head around, people are saying it's not stretch-mediated hypertrophy, it's training at long muscle lengths. Do you have anything to say to that, about that?
Oh God. Yeah. So before I go there, I love both you and Milo, because like you guys remind me of me when I was younger. It's like I told you, it's like you wake up, I'm choosing some violence today. Let's do it. And like that was me with like the calories in versus calories out model. Like was like every day I'm like, all right, who am I going to fight? Like which NPC dude today am I going to fight?
I missed this phase of you. All I saw is like the wise man, the wise legend.
No. So I see it. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember. I just wanted to get in a fight today. Like my day would be incomplete if I didn't.
There's hope for me.
Yeah. So I love it. I love it because I see a lot of parts of myself that I honestly miss. Every once in a while, I'm like, I'm gonna start a fight. No, I'm not. I ain't got time for that. But yeah, you know, I this is a little bit out of my range, but I guess I see some similarities in. So, for example, I don't know if you've seen what happens to a limb when you like don't mobilize it. It's quite insane. Like my friend Ron Parmenter, great bodybuilder, had some of the best arms I've ever seen, and I remember he tore his bicep trying to do like CrossFitter things, right? And flipping a tire. And then it was like 3 weeks in, maybe 4 weeks in, like he was in the sling. By the time they removed the sling, because, you know, he didn't have that small signaling that gravity's always like buzzing around. Like we forget how much that actually matters, right? I think it's one of the reasons that like legs, when they're injured, they don't atrophy as quickly as like upper body, like because they're in line with gravity, right? Yeah, it's still gravity. So I think when we're talking about like the stretch mediated hypertrophy, it's very similar to that. Like when I saw Ron's arm, I'm like, I know if you just didn't lift for 4 weeks, it wouldn't look that bad. But since it was like immobilized, it's like he probably hadn't had arms that small since he was like 12 or something, right?
That goes to show you the value of volume, even
micro like signaling. Just
right? Value was everything. Fuck.
So, but that kind of throws a wrench in the stretch mediated hypertrophy. I think the load that you're stretching under makes it so that you don't have to spend necessarily as much time under tension, but it's still time under tension. It just takes these huge amounts of volume, in this case, time, to create a sim. So I think the mechanisms are kind of similar. It's just one's obviously not very practical, unless you're crazy like my boy Eric. He strapped himself to like this boot apparatus and like literally was stretching his calves for like, I think an hour or 30 minutes a day, something like that.
Did it get
in the name of science? Oh yeah, it worked really well. It worked really well. So yeah, it was quite insane. Like he had some really bad
immobilized. Oh, sorry, it wasn't immobilized constantly, but the protocol was immobilization in a stretch for 30 minutes, which
in the stretch
going to do that.
Yeah. So yeah, I just think that like again, you would require, you know, like these quail studies, you'd have to be under this duress for these extreme periods of time. Whereas like with lifting weights, okay, yeah, a set lasts like 30, 40 seconds, but the signaling is just much louder. But I imagine it's the same concept. It's just different situations, right?
Right, we got to get some rats and some fucking test and just immobilize those guys in a stretch and just fucking get some crazy jacked rats. Like,
but it's crazy, right? Like an immobilized limb, like you're like, man, it's just crazy. All the little signaling that like people who tear their pecs versus people who have, say, like a quad injury. The guy with the quad injury, like his legs look almost the same a month later. Whereas like the guy with the pecs, since they're not in line with gravity, those things just like dissolve.
How much did Eric suffer throughout the protocol? Was it getting really sore by the end of the third? Do you know any, as far as like could he push it further? It sucked, but like when he gets something in his head, he's just going like, yeah, he's not quitting. He's not letting go. We were talking about pain tolerance, and I'm like, I definitely, I gave him credit. Like I'm old enough to be okay with it. I'm like, yeah, I think you have a much higher pain tolerance than I do, like for sure. So yeah, it was uncomfortable. I wouldn't do it. Yeah, I don't have the pain tolerance for any of that shit.
No.
Like me and my brother, that's where I realized I was mentally weak. Me and my brother, I assume we've got similar genetics, and we were exposed to the same training growing up. He's a national champion at all the sports he did. And I was just sort of in the middle of the pack, and I'm like, fuck, I actually must just be mentally fucking weak. I had to accept it.
I didn't know this.
There's no test. You know what I mean? Like you never know if you have good or bad genetics. My brother, so surf lifesaving is a very big sport in Australia. There was sort of a professional sort of scene for it. You know, people like Trevor Hendy, they were my brother's idols growing up. So he was the best person in the country and probably the world, I guess, when he was sort of from 17 to 19. You'd swim out in the ocean about 1 kilometer, then you'd paddle a board, and then you'd paddle a ski. And my brother was just an absolute fucking demon at that. He was a national level pool swimmer as well. But yeah, in Australia, if you're a little bit off the mark, you'll sort of fall into surf life saving. And yeah, he's a fucking weapon. He's the reason I became a personal trainer. He got into personal training when he sort of realized that the professional surf lifesavers weren't actually getting paid that much. So,
no, I understand that. Same thing in natural bodybuilding. Like I think,
and that's it. Like now, with the hindsight that I sort of have, realizing it's like you can monetize anything if you can just get people to watch you. Like I think we could have actually done it, but hindsight's 2020. His daughter, I guess, will have these opportunities.
It's so insane. Yeah. Like it's so insane. Like I would have to get too far off topic, but like my daughter, I'm just going to have a fund, and I have some business savvy friends, and what she's going to have to do is like, okay, you want that money when, you know, you're an adult, you have to talk to them and make sure that it's a good plan. And these are people who are much better at these things, much more forward seeing than I am. And it could be college. It could be, I don't know, a balloon factory. It don't matter. Right.
But just to open up some opportunities. Now, that'd be good. So you feel like you have the self-awareness to not be too crazy of a sporting dad?
Yeah. Yeah. So you got to be a doctor, lawyer, you know, because just do your thing, you know, because this stuff don't feel like work to you and I, right? That's like, our friends might be like, man, you're a dog at working, but it's like, literally I wake up, and in your case, like I wake up and I'm a, you know, pound on some functional freak somewhere, right?
I guess that's the benefit that like your kid will have, and hopefully my kid will have, of having a parent that chose like an awkward career path. Hopefully just that openness and acceptance, like knowing that you just want them to be happy with whatever they're doing. It's like life will work itself out. Like that's kind of the biggest issue.
Yeah. Whatever doesn't exhaust you, before you know it's like you've ran out of day. That's what you should be doing.
If you're sick of going goblin mode on the same 4 accessory exercises at the end of every single session, head to the notes below and grab our free gymnastics program. It'll change the way you think about accessories forever.
So just to work through these in a little bit of a lightning round, thoughts on biasing different parts of the lats and pecs? And I'm going to cap you at 60 seconds because I'm sure you can give a lot of nuance, but I want not a hot take to shit up, but as in like, do you think about it? Should other people be thinking about it? What is the role?
Yeah, I think it does matter, but it doesn't matter until it matters. I think very early on, the target's just huge, right? Like early on, you can grow biceps from just squatting, right? Because just holding on to the bar, that loaded isometric, that'll be plenty, right? But as you advance, I think that's where these very like pinpoint movements would benefit you. It's like, how do I target this without targeting these other things that I'm just anthropometrically put together in a way where they will take charge of the movement?
Almost another micro level of the arm specialization. It's like in a certain sense, you could go upper pec, sternal pec, what they're labeling as specialization versus clavicular pec would be the upper pec. Just saying it out loud, I'm like definitely fucking got some eyes rolling with that one. I mean, my chest development speaks for itself. Thank you for that answer. What is the role of intensifier techniques? Things like myo reps, things like drop sets. What are we doing there?
No novel stimulus. They're not going to make you grow in a different way or bust you out of plateaus. It's just more of a time-saving strategy.
Okay. Yeah. So they are legitimately practical. All right, fuck it. Let's get into the surprise section. I have been uploading more shirtless selfies than ever, and I hear that posing is very important. Obviously, I should try to get more muscly, but I'm told that even with the amount of muscle I have, there is a way I can present myself to look bigger. And I'm sort of curious as well, just while I pull these images up, can you talk about, are there any broad principles that apply to posing in general, or is it specific to where my muscular strengths are or each individual pose? There's no like consistent rules like do this to look bigger. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think first of all, we kind of do this instinctively in all sorts of ways, right? Like for example, like women tend to take selfies like up here, right? And then guys like up here. So, one wants to appear taller on average, shorter. So we do this all the time, right? All the time, right? We present what we want to present. And that's all that bodybuilding really is. It's like you present what you want to present. But there's a few golden rules here, and that's just your hips. I think, like, for example, in this shot, like the meat that you want to present, you would bring it closer to the camera, right? So you would probably
myself forward a little bit, like a small bend at the waist, or more like the MJ leaning forward.
You actually, right? You already made that connection. That was the second step. The first step was just like protract your scapula, bring that shoulder over, right? So now you're kind of like this.
Get wide.
But that would be the second thing was like, so get that hip like that way, right? So that now you have more of an X frame. So a lot of it is
this
just
any hip could go forward. Could you say like this guy on camera, his right hip should be the one going back, or
you can do like the tilts, like the Michelangelo, like that, like that statue. Oh, David, right?
Yeah.
But that's a little bit more advanced. I think for something like this, just point that hip back so that it's back. So we look wider and more X-framing.
Okay. All right, thank you. Yeah, that was anything else sort of before we move on to, I got a little bit freakier on my next one.
Oh, that looks, that's solid, man.
Thank you very much.
With that.
We're not working with much as well. I was pretty, these are the pics that when I look at, I'm like, I don't look like that normally. So I felt like I did a good job of capturing myself. This was right after I finished up with a stomach bug in Bali. So I was absolutely just, dry as fuck. I was really happy with the package I brought here.
That's how you do it. You get food poisoning. That's how we peak. You're doing a great job here. I think a few things. You're really stretching that muscle and getting the tricep into the lat so that, fellows will do this with the bicep picture, right? Like just arms crossed sort of pic that you see.
Can you
kind of do that with your lat instinctively
on stage, or is that like the judges see what you're doing?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, you do it. It's weird if
Whatever
you don't.
you can
It's
do.
honestly weird if you don't. Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm really good at turning my arm. Like my arm looks like a track and field guy's arm, and then all of a sudden I hit this pose, and it looks like I'm maybe not natural. Like that's how good this pose is.
Is this the
shove
best?
my tricep into the.
Would you say that this is one of the best poses for overselling your arms just because of the tricep lat smush?
It can be. But a lot of people like they just don't have, and this is like where bodybuilding is that genetic. They just don't have the lat and then like the muscle bellies in the arm in a place where they collide, like as well as they do for you there. So some people, it's just luck of the draw. Like you, much like myself, you can really smash those things together. A lot of people can't.
So we have nice tricep insertions. Like one thing we got, because I'm guessing like I don't have like the wide clavicles. Going back up.
You might have. I have terrible tricep insertions, but it's more so about where my lats and triceps meet. But yeah, the whole time on stage, dude, we're doing so many things to cheat. It's quite insane. Like if you ever saw a bodybuilding show from the side, all the poses look so weird and contorted, like so unnatural. It's quite hilarious.
Okay, because this is quite interesting to me. It's also something I've been picking up on with track and field. It's viewed from the side. It is coached from the side. And everyone talks about how beautiful, efficient sprinting form looks like. But when you watch it, especially acceleration, watching it from the front, because no one's ever getting coached from the front. And I think it's like, high speed running isn't a fucking beauty pageant. Like there are some people, Christian Coleman runs like 9.7s and he doesn't have what I would call like sexy running technique, but everyone, even like Asafa Powell, throws some pretty fucking gross shapes from the front. I'm like, is it literally just because they're never watched from that angle? So they've just accepted more things, and it is just
crazy.
Things like that trickle down.
The French guy, the French 100-meter sprinter, I don't know if he's still running. But
he's not.
He had one leg. It was almost like he was skateboarding, right? Like one leg was just going out in this direction. Like legs that were doing completely different things. So that's the beautiful part about athletics. It's like people don't realize how amazing the brain is, and that it figures out like these problems in the most efficient way that it knows how, right? And sometimes they don't look right, and sometimes they are worth correcting, but this is something I discovered in a much simpler sport, like in powerlifting fairly early on, that sometimes like these imperfections that athletes have, that's literally their best shot at, when it comes to the performing their best at the game. Right. So like, this was back when like Valgus was just like, you got to fix that.
Because in bodybuilding, I understand the desire for symmetry, but then in anything that's performance focused, people are like, oh, you don't want a weak side. It's like, well, no, but you have a strong side. Like, did you think about that? It's like, it doesn't matter what side of the body does it. You're just trying to accomplish a fucking task. It can be done with either side. Hopefully both are doing a bit, but they don't need to do the same amount. Like you don't get fucking bonus points for winning 100-meter. Again, it's not a beauty pageant. Whereas, I love
it.
Something that was interesting.
I love what you do, man.
Thank you. To hear you sort of talk about, that was really validating. I've always been insecure about how asymmetrical I feel like my body is, especially my musculature, my abs are asymmetrical. I mean, the more and more, that's the only thing that jumps out at me. But when I look at myself too much, when I've been really hitting the gym, so like pecs and like my left arm's way bigger than my right arm. But and you're someone, a lot of people I just look at and their physique's symmetrical to me, but I was surprised at how much symmetry you found that I also saw when you drew my attention to it. But can you just talk about that a little bit? And then I'm also curious about trying to change your asymmetries through training, if you think there's any sort of merit to that. But sorry for the long-winded question.
No, it's like usually like symmetry in bodybuilding, it's not left to right. Usually symmetry to in bodybuilding is just, it's just like a catchy tune. It's a beautiful song. Like, it's very intuitive. You go to enough shows and you're like, oh, wow. Like something about this guy's, like how his DNA like unwraps into these muscles. Just it's a wonderful tune. So we had an Iron Culture podcast a few weeks back. And I described the physics that go into, say, catching a baseball, right? Like, you see it come off, it's like very quickly. It's like there's the speed, the trajectory of the thing, and you happen to just be in the right place very quickly. Like this complicated math problem you solved quickly. Same thing with symmetry. It's just one of those things where it's like, okay, yeah, we can get into like what's taking place here at a mathematical level, but very quickly people are able to decipher the difference between, like, say, a Kevin Lebroni type physique versus a guy like Branch Warren, right? So symmetry is more so like flow. It's not left to right. It's just like, this is very pleasing to look at. And left to right asymmetries are just so common that as long as they're not, like, I have so many, it's crazy. As long as it's not a muscle tear or some sort of nerve damage, it really doesn't take away from the physique, and
doesn't
nobody
draw attention. Yeah.
Yeah, only you notice it, really. Yeah. Like what is? Oh, like I know a lot of former athletes have like they want to get into bodybuilding. They have like rec fem tears.
Oh, right.
I
was thinking,
that looks gnarly. But that looks very obvious, right? So it's like, that is like, ooh, like it ruins the flow, the music, the symmetry. But usually left to right things, man, I have so many, like every muscle group, virtually every, I can't think of one muscle group that I have that's like identical, like left to right, or like even 80%, in my opinion.
Yeah, because you can't run away from it. You are how much time you are forced to just constantly be studying your physique? I know there's a limit to it, probably to stop yourself developing like a neurosis. Is it that one of the main reasons to have a coach, so that you don't have to be the only one looking at it as well, I imagine?
It's strange because I literally forget that I look weird, and it wasn't, and I don't even like. It's just, I assign like times jacked. To do it. Like,
like you have a Dragon Ball Z physique. Yeah.
Well, like not this summer, but actually 3 summers ago was the first time that I've ever really been out in public without like sleeves. Like,
do you hit the beach much?
I've never.
Not in Colorado.
Well, yeah, even in San Francisco, it's like it's violent cold beach, so like no one really goes to the beach. It's like it's right where the Pacific gets like really ugly. So, but no, and I can't swim, just like most like inner city kids. So your brother's even that much more amazing to me in that respect. But yeah, I think when it comes to bodybuilding, it's like there's a time and a place for it, and then you just have to disconnect, because it's all encompassing as it is. And I think that's something that really good athletes know how to do, is like they need to learn how to find that like inner Usain Bolt in them. Like he was so good at being loose, right? Obviously when you're that good, it's easy, right? But he's a prime example of like, hey, I'm loose, but when it's on, and just like that, they can turn it on.
That's exactly how I explain it to people, and he's my number one example, because you're right. And I think a lot of people picked up on his ability to disassociate and just be fucking about, be like posing for the camera and stuff like that. But no one talks about how, like, no, but as soon as he needed to be on, he was on. And as soon as he didn't need to be on again, he was off. Even if it was like with 30 meters of the race to go, he was like, he was so fucking yin and yang, like so dialed when he needed to be. It was what was the world championship where Gatlin beat him in the fucking heats, in the fucking semis? And I don't think Bolt was in peak shape, but in the final fucking race, he just locked in and ran the perfect race, and Gatlin fucked up the final step of the race. And again, Bolt didn't need to be locked in the heat, didn't need to be locked in the semi, but he was the man every single fucking time. And that's why it would have been so crazy to see someone like Lyles do the double, talk all that shit. I mean, he got the triple gold at the World Championships, which is already such an insane feat. And he fell short, but like, I hope that just goes to prove to people, Noah Lyles is a generational talent. But Usain Bolt, to do what he fucking did, to have the potential to do it, but actually fucking do it every single time is just... And again, I think a big part of it was just having the right attitude.
It's insane. I'm nowhere near that level, but people trip at the gym because I don't listen to music when I train. And it's just because like... I don't, and it's crazy. It's like, I can't tell you what sort of music my gym plays, because like when it's time to go, it's time to go. And other than that, like I'm out there, like chatting it up with everyone, and then getting in my zone, chatting it up with everyone. And like a lot of my I guess, bodybuilder comrades that like they want to compete, or they are competitors. They're like they don't get it. They're like, you should be like focused and grumpy hood over. And I'm like, bro, that's just, in my opinion, not how real athletes like take care of it.
Can't do that
like,
for 20 years. That's a YouTube
No.
bodybuilding motivation clip. That's not a life. Like it's.
No, it's like I'm loosey goosey until it's time to go, and then it's time to go. And I did hit a new peak in focus the other day. This was crazy. So like, I don't hear music when I'm training. Like I can't hear what's going on, but I can. But the other day, I kid you not, like in the middle of a rep, like everything just like the sound turned off. I've never experienced that in my life. It was, like mind blowing.
Unison. Yeah, actually.
It's just the only thing that existed was that. Going back to your accessories and like people's like shorter attention span, like it's just crazy how
you can't 4x10
work can
at that
be.
level. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Where can people find you? Is there anything you've got coming up that you want people to know about?
3dmusclejourney.com. Basically everything's there. No, I guess outside of that, like we have the World Championships in our niche sport, and that's being held in November. So I like to put that out there because WNBF Worlds, it's a big deal to me, but it isn't to the world. And I wish it's one of those things. I'm like, I want it to be. I'm like, yo, it's in Boston, people. It's like, get in there, like if you're close enough, because it's a real cheap ticket. And in my opinion, like a lot of people will disagree with me, I think the best genetics in bodybuilding are in the drug-free sports, because some of these people are they're not even tempted because everything they do works for them, right? Yeah. They don't even know how good they are. They're just so like just happy-go-lucky folks, right?
Not everyone wants to do drugs as well. Like some people don't want to inject. A lot of people actually don't want to inject themselves every day. Believe it or not. I know you know this, but and I feel like a lot of people, if they think about do you want to inject something every single day, that will maybe do a lot for if you are a natty skeptic. Just and go ask other people, be like, would you inject yourself? And you'll find some people who are like, hell fucking yes, actually I do a bit of that and I don't win things. But like most people I think will tell you just whether they lift or whether they don't. They're like, nah, not for me.
Yeah, no, Angus, there's a video of me getting blood work checked to get my testosterone levels checked a few years back. Like as soon as they pull out I hate needles, bro. Like it wasn't acting. Like I can't even look back at the video because it's traumatizing. Like my face is just like, it's a trigger. So check that out, folks. I'll be competing next year. And then also before I go, my wife Cynthia is a huge fan of your work, as well as like the whole gym out here, the Pursuit Gym. They have a great training facility, and especially all the trainers are amazing, but especially Santi. Like he was so psyched. We were at a baby shower, and I was like, "I'm going on his podcast." He was like, "Bullshit." I was like, "Yeah." Like so,
such a gym.
So yeah. So they love
what's
you,
the gym called?
What you do. Pursuit.
All right. Shout out to Pursuit Gym. I'm coming to the States next year, and Colorado is not on the list, but I mean, we're going to do a road trip, so maybe we'll come through.
Hey, dude, that'd be amazing. Yeah.
We value your input here at the High Performance Podcast. Head to the SpeakPipe link in the notes below, and you can leave us a voicemail where you can ask us a question or leave us a topic for us to explore on the show. We hope to hear from you soon.